for me, a solution for the U.S. economy is there. It's literally in the tech transfer offices right now.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. In the world of tech entrepreneurship, there's a critical stretch between promising research and an actual product that you have manufactured, scaled, and brought to market. For startups and small businesses, crossing that valley often depends on access to relationships, resources, partnerships, and, of course, the federal technology transfer system. Today, we're revisiting a conversation from season 1 with Chris Campbell, founder and CEO of Simpli-Fi Automation, an electronic systems engineering solutions company. In this conversation, which was recorded in April of 2024, Chris shares his perspectives as an entrepreneur navigating tech transfer, why it matters, what challenges it helps solve, and how it can be a lifeline for businesses working to move innovation from the lab to the marketplace. Let's jump in. Chris Campbell, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about this subject because it hits so close to home.
So let's just dive right in. Tell me about your background and how you got introduced to tech transfer.
Well, this is a very interesting story. So my background started with electrical systems engineering. It was something I was interested even while still in high school, learning about audio engineering and audio video systems. And so that's what I went to school for, but it was with a medical perspective. So I initially went to school to be a med tech technician. But life led me into systems engineering is what I did for 20 years. And that's really taking lots of different technologies and making them act as one thing. So what we did, we had a building automation company, and we would go into buildings and control their lighting, their HVAC, their security, entry access, cameras, all of it, and make it act as one entity. So that if something happened in one part of the building, the system would know, and it would be able to modify the building for efficiency. And that's what I did for 20 years. I became very good at it. I, built a lot of credibility and had a lot of experience. But that was the starting. It was the understanding of technology and the understanding of engineering that enabled me to kind of dive into this process.
Excellent. And so from there, you made a bit of a turn. You were introduced to some technology at NASA. Can you sort of unpack that?
So I was about 3 years into our business. This is actually right about the time of COVID. And in fact, COVID was a huge part in us taking this pivot because it kind of forced us to. But at that time, we were just introduced to an ecosystem that was being formed in St. Paul. And it was led by a company called Brown Venture Group. And they had a thesis. The thesis was if you empowered minority businesses with tech transfer, it could act as a catapult. And so at that time, we were designing a device that would kind of monitor, help people who were healing at home have more autonomy. And it was a device that would control a medical hospital bed at home. And imagine using Alexa to raise the head of the bed or to call for help from your care provider, simple things like that. And we were really close to being finished with that project. So we were like, yes, we're going to be in the market. We're going to generate revenue. It's going to be so awesome. But then COVID happened and we had to take a little pause. And that's actually when Brown Venture introduced us to the NASA tech transfer program. And he said, look, if you're building something and, there might be an added technology that you can use and make it better. I said, well, sure, let's look at what they have. So I went to the NASA tech transfer website and I probably couldn't think another thought for about 3 days. It was overwhelming how many amazing technologies were there. And my head's swimming. So I'm like, wait a minute. If I would have saw these before I started, I probably would have chose something different because there's a lot of really cool technologies here that can change the world, but they're kind of sitting on a shelf collecting dust. So we looked through that portfolio. We saw some really cool sensors that would allow us to make our bed just a little bit better. And the one that really, really stood out to me was the NASA electronic nose. And I was like, whoa, what is an electronic nose and how can that help? But what we were looking for was a way to detect whether a patient had an accident in the bed. That way, and we were focusing on people who had either quadriplegics or someone that didn't have the ability to maybe sense those things themselves. And so when I saw this technology at NASA, it immediately clicked. I was like, wait a minute, we can use this electronic nose, which really it's a sensor that gives the capability of smell, but it gives it to an electronic system. So imagine like a dog's nose, for instance. It's pretty widely known that dogs have the ability to detect cancer on their master's breath. And the way they do that is really unique. They're looking for a smell, a particular smell that a chemical makes that's not normally there from their master. And it simply alerts them. Now, they don't know it's cancer. That's something they can be trained to do. They just know there's a difference. And so this sensor is designed to do that same thing. It's designed to smell either gases or breath and just notice a difference. And the difference is a healthy state and an unhealthy state. And so I saw this device and I was like, wait a minute, this definitely requires some digging into. And at that time, our company was pretty small. We had, I think, 16 employees total, but most of them were technicians. We had about 4 engineers. So I took the engineering team. I said, look, do you think we can take this sensor and actually build it and incorporate it into what we're doing? And the answer was no, we cannot. It's not our core competency. This requires chemistry. It's not just a straight transition from what we're doing now into what it would take to build this sensor. And so there was a little intrepidation because I didn't know if we had the capabilities. I was like, well, we're not a medical company. I don't have the credibility in that industry to really do what I want to do. So it required us kind of thinking about how we would use it. So we were introduced to it first, and that gave us a period to kind of look at it and to study it. We had a 1-year research license. And that's kind of where the fun started, is diving into what the technology could do. And that was like the beginning of the play process. So I guess the question is that, how do we get here? Well, we were an engineering company. We got introduced to NASA through a ecosystem, and it kind of opened a door to us that we didn't know about. So,
and the whole issue of not knowing what you don't know is such a hard problem to overcome. And so now that in 2020, or hindsight 2020, not the year 2020, how would you say that other entrepreneurs could get that kind of exposure to the fact that the whole world of technology transfer exists?
I think that in order for a company, being exposed to it is one thing, but having the confidence to actually do it is a whole nother thing. And that's why I believe really ecosystems are a must. Because if it weren't for the ecosystem introducing us to the concept, I wouldn't have known about it. But if I didn't have the support of the ecosystem, I wouldn't have done it. I would have said the risks are too high. What do I know about making a chemi-resistive sensor? Relatively nothing. I knew a lot about electronics, so I knew I had the core to do it. But do I want to take that risk as a business? Do I want to make a pivot from what we're doing, which we have a plan and a clear sight to the goal? Do I want to pivot to something that would take a lot of money and a lot of time, and I don't have a high confidence of doing it? You kind of have to be a little crazy to do that. But the ecosystem is what enables that risk mitigation for me to say, okay, I may not have everything that it takes, but I do have the core competency. I can get it started. And if there's an ecosystem that can support that. So for us, what we needed was chemical engineers. We needed artificial intelligence algorithm writers. There's lots of things that were outside of our core competency that we needed. And the ecosystem's where we went to find those things. Now, at first, the ecosystem wasn't fully developed. So it required us kind of identifying some of the problems and then helping to go find the answers, find the partners who can help solve those questions. Because really at their core, ecosystems are relationships. They enable the connections that promote those collaborative relationships. And so some of the challenges that minorities have is a lack of relationship. So we don't know someone who has the answer. So it takes us a little bit more time, a little bit more digging to get to the answer, not because the answer's not there. What I found was the answers are there. There are ecosystems that have already been created, but how do we connect the dots? How do we bring the entrepreneurs who need those ecosystems to the table? And that, I think, is one of the core issues is building the ecosystem is one thing, but building the relationships that connect the ecosystems with the entrepreneurs, to me, that's the chasm.
Yeah. And I know from the federal lab side, a lot of people who I talk to who are federal employees say, we have all this technology and the business community doesn't necessarily know that we're here. Or if they know, they're nervous to work with the government because they think it's just going to be a big headache. Did you have any of that? Yeah.
Yes, I did. So I didn't classify it as a headache. It was more so I have to learn how to draw within the lines. I need to know how to engage the tech transfer office. And better yet, I need to know what the rules of engagement are. And so, but that's a learning curve. None of us know it. There's not a single entrepreneur in the United States who natively knows this. So how do we teach? Well, the ecosystem is the starting point. But that's one of the challenges is that as a small company, we don't have the resources to really learn how to navigate those things. Because who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the classes and the learning curve and the time? Our guys need to be doing the work. So that's a challenge is that the education is needed because really the education unlocks the opportunity. It unlocks the awareness. But it was terrifying at first, but I will say that NASA did an excellent job of guiding me through the process. So I didn't have to learn everything at once. I took a full year's research license first. That got me acclimated to the system. That I was able to see where the lines are. Now, I don't know how to color within them yet, but it gave me kind of the rules of engagement. And we took that year and we did intense study, intense design. And at the end, we went back to NASA and said, well, this is what we've come up with. This is what our engineering teams found. This is the research. These are our prototypes very early, because one of the risks about tech transfer is that they don't include prototypes. They don't include the thing working. It's more like, here's a great idea that this lab has put X amount of dollars and time and effort into it, but it's like a TRL level 4. It's going to take at least 2 years to even come up with a minimally viable product for some of these technologies.
Some quick context here. TRL means technology readiness levels, which is a scale that measures a technology's maturity level from 1 to 9. Levels 1 through 3 are the research phase, 4 to 6 are development, and 7 to 9 are deployment. So at level 4, Chris's technology was around the early stages of testing. Okay, back to Chris.
So the question is, how does it, especially with a small business, how does a small business last for 2 years that it takes to do this research, to give its undivided attention and not be spread too thin? Because nothing good's done when people are spread too thin. And that's the challenge that I'm still figuring out now. How do you resource a company? And that leads to other questions.
I was just going to ask you how did you do that?
Well, that I think is another, let's say, core principle of what's preventing this process from working. And just to give more of a historical context, most businesses are started, in fact, all businesses are started with a particular round of investment, and it's called your friends and family round. Another term is friends, families, and fools. Because with a new company, those are the only 3 people who would invest in a startup that hasn't proven themselves. Your friends, so that's usually someone who's done well on their own and believes in you, trusts you, has enough credibility or relationship with you to invest. But what happens when your friends and family don't have the resources to invest? That's that relationship disconnect. What happens when my uncle thinks my idea is great because I wrote it on a napkin while I was at the bar, but he doesn't have the liquidity to risk it on me, so he's not going to. And then how do I get strategic capital or venture capital unless I've done the first stages of proving? You don't. So the chasm of going from the lab to the market's one thing, but how do you get into the lab? Right. For a company, especially a small minority business, it's almost impossible, because before I joined this process, we were generating revenue. We were already in the market. We weren't a huge company. We were bringing in about $400,000 a year. And for a startup, felt pretty good about it. We had a good trajectory, but we had to give up even that revenue to dive into this. So it took a lot of faith, but it did take that friends and family round from our ecosystem partners. They're the ones who believed in us early on. That's Brown Venture Group. They believed in us early on. they strategically introduced us to the tech transfer process because they found that de-risks their investment. Mm-hmm. If they invest into a company who's using a federal technology, there's a higher chance of success because that technology is proven. They're not starting from scratch with an idea that doesn't have validity. So they found that they strategically invest in companies who are engaging with the federal labs because it becomes a de-risking mechanism. Mm-hmm. And so their thesis is this: if we invest into a company who's going to license this technology, they provide the license and the awareness. That technology, that company then develops it and adds their own intellectual property on top of it. Then they patent their own application. Now they've de-risked it in two ways. They've de-risked it in terms of they're using a technology that's validated. Now they've de-risked it by developing that technology at an early stage and getting a patent or an IP. The IP gives a tangible value. It's a property. Mm-hmm. And so that's what allowed me to then go and raise funds because I already had the patent. And that's another thing that this ecosystem did. They introduced me to the USPTO, the Patent Office Pro Bono Program. That's how we filed our first patent. Look, when I started this process, I didn't have $20,000 laying around to hire a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So because I didn't think I can do it, I never attempted to actually write those patents. But it was being introduced to that program that I said, wait a minute, I can do the work. You guys will assign a lawyer to me to help me, and I can file this patent just for the cost of filing it. Sign me up. And so we did that. We got introduced to the USPTO Pro Bono Program. We filed our first patent. In fact, it was Jim Patterson who helped found that program, who helped me learn how to write a patent. He taught me what a claim was and how to differentiate a claim between just an item in the description. And so that enabled me then to both learn how to do it for myself and then become a champion for other minorities to say, look, this is possible. You are an inventor. The thing that kept you from making that patent is the inability to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So that money is the barrier, not capability. And I think that's one of the challenges is that there's so many capable contributors, but they never make it to the table because friends and family. Mm-hmm. Historically, the money's not in the community, so it never makes it into the business. So the way we got past that and the way we were enabled is through the thesis from Brown Venture that focused on this demographic that said, okay, we're looking for minority owners who have capabilities. So they're looking at character. They're looking at, can you get knocked down and get back up again? Do you have the grit to go through challenges and keep on going? Those are things that it's kind of hard to teach. Right. So they invest into that. So we were basically a test case for their thesis, and it's still in the process, but so far for our company, it's working out very well.
So tell me about where things are with your company now.
So today's actually a super important day for us. We got our commercial license from NASA last year, and we moved from kind of early development into making the thing. And there was lots of challenges there, lots, and way more than the time we have in this podcast. But where we are today is that we've finished design and we're in production. So we're going from the iterative process where we produce one or two of these things into a process where we can scale and do 1,000, 10,000, or 1 million. And that requires a lot of investment, a lot of partnership, because one of the mandates for the tech transfer program, you have to make it in the U.S. So what happens when there's not the capabilities in the U.S. to make it? That's what we faced. So we had to create those capabilities, which we did. Now, when I say we, I mean, there's a large group of really powerful contributors that have done this, that are in the U.S., that we're working with. And that took the relationship building. So where we are today is that we're just starting our scaled manufacturing. We're going into our trials with Cleveland Clinic and some others I can't mention until they're signed off on. But we're getting the data. Now, where we started, though, we didn't wait until we are testing on humans before we know it works. We first started testing on cows.
Okay.
So, interesting enough. Yeah. But this is going to speak to the collaboration part, because this this speaks to how we got to this point. It wasn't on our own. It wasn't because we knew innately how to do all these things. It was through partnerships, and it really was through serving. So what we did is we partnered with another NASA technology transfer partner that had licensed the same exact technology, but for a different application. The company is called Acclimate. They're actually based in Australia, and they use our same core technology to determine pregnancy in cows. That's one of the things they do. And they had a challenge. They had spent, I think, 5 years before we licensed the technology. They were working on it. They did a ton of development in the biologics part and the chemistry part, but it was all by hand. It was all just, one-off lab level stuff. And they were looking for the solution to scale. Okay. What we did, being electrical engineers, we started at the scale part. We started at, okay, how do we take this core technology and duplicate 1 million of them? That was our first question we asked ourselves when we started. And we engineered from that perspective. And where we met Accent was right in the middle. They had a technology that wasn't scalable yet, but they had tons and tons of great data. And we had a scale technology that we didn't have the data for yet. So how do you validate yourself before you have the data? You work with someone else. That's how you do it. You partner with another company that has a different need that is complementary to yours. So we partnered with Accent, and within a few short months, we were able to validate the sensor, because it's the same sensor we're using. So we were able to validate that the sensor worked. We were able to work with Accent to prove their concept and to create their software technology. Because our focus was on software, theirs was on hardware. And by collaborating, we were able to advance our development probably about 18 months. By partnering with them within 3 months, we cut out 18 months of our own development. Wow. Now, yeah, we had to front the bill. We had, because, we're the ones getting the major value from it. But what they got was a functional software platform that allowed them to do this work independent now. They can make these calculations in the field and collect this data in the field. So collaboratively, at this day, we're both at the precipice of releasing. Now, Accent's a lot further ahead of us, but with that collaborative partnership, now we are able to have the confidence to buy the machines that it takes to do this. Because that's the juggling act. If I'm going to make these, and I'm going to make them in the US, I'm going to make them myself, because there's no manufacturers that can do this exact technology. So that's what we did. And what that allowed, it allowed now an ecosystem that the other companies, like maybe 6 or 7 other companies in the US who are creating similar technologies. Now we become an ecosystem for manufacturing for them. So by solving our own problem, which is how do we make these things in the US? Because we could have went to China. We could have went to Europe. We could have went to Israel and Sweden. I think those are the 4 main places. But we can't. We have to make them here. So now it allows the other companies who were making them elsewhere to say, whoa, there's a partner in the US that we can make it now. Because the goal has to be increasing US-based capabilities. And so that's what the tech transfer program is all about. So that's where we are. We are on the ground running. The plane is in the sky, but there's still tons of work left to do. Like, look, I try to be pragmatic. This is not going to be a 1 year, knock it out the park project. I'm buckled in for a 10-year project here. So it took us 2 years to get the device to where it's in reality now. It's working, it's taking measurements, but it's MVP. It's not ready for game time. There's a lot of work between now and game time. And that's where we're focused. We're focused on validating it. Validating what's there, building credibility, because this technology is new. There's not a lot of predicates. So people's natural instinct will be, has to be fake, dude. Like if that's the tricorder, then, but that's the part of the process. And, it's a step-by-step thing.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is you brought the wild faith, the experience in entrepreneurship and the engineering, but not necessarily in this arena. You also brought a lot of moxie, and then you had to find the network, the resources, the partner, the funds. Is that about right? That
sounds about right. And I'll say that without the ecosystem there, it would have just been insane. It would just been crazy, not moxie, no, just insane. But it was really the presentation of the ecosystem is what gave me the confidence, because without that, I would have been like, yeah, there's no way. Who can waste their time? And it wouldn't happen. But yeah, it did take, I'll say a certain level of crazy, because confidence is one thing, but confidence comes from experience, and I didn't have experience in this. So where was I going to get the confidence from? Well, let's say past experiences myself. I knew that from myself and my team that we can solve challenges. Our company, we presented it as a solutions provider. So whatever the challenge is, we're presented with that challenge, and we were designers and engineers that created solutions. So this was no different. This was just another challenge. Yes, it was a bigger challenge than ones we had faced, and it had variables that we weren't accustomed to, mainly in chemistry. But that's where the ecosystem came into place. We had to find partners that did have that knowledge, that did have that credibility. And it's through that partnership that we were able to pull this off. So on our own, it would have been nutso, wouldn't have done it. I have people that I have to account for. I wouldn't have done it. But through the ecosystem and through that relationship really is where we had the confidence to jump off the diving board, as it were.
And I'm going to ask you to sort of nail that, because ecosystem is so broad. And if there's entrepreneurs listening and saying, where do I find this ecosystem? Where do I?
Okay. So that's actually a big part of the problem, is that I looked really, really hard. When I discovered the problem, which is like day 3, I looked really, really hard. Who can I go to? And I was searching carbon nanotube, because this is a carbon nanotube sensor. So I was searching every key phrase, everything that I can do to look for help. Because the question was, who can help me? And it was like, who can I hire to help me do this? And I was floored when the answer was no one. When I found out that there wasn't a company that I can just go to and order these things and then build my device, I had to build the sensor itself. Look, there's a huge difference between taking sensors that are on the shelf and putting them into a device. That's pretty easy. We can do that without a whole lot of difficulty. But how do you make the sensor itself? That's a whole different set of expertise, a whole different set of core competency. And so when I saw that, and I was like, well, okay, we can build the device, we can build the motherboard, I can do the programming, we can do the software, we can build the machine learning algorithms, but I can't build a chemi-resistive sensor. That's chemistry. And so the ecosystem is basically this. The ecosystem it has partners that can solve the challenges you face. And for us, it's usually in development and manufacturing. So it's about relationships. An ecosystem combines relationships into one place that you can go and search your solution, search for the partner. So if the ecosystem specializes in nanofabrication, they're going to have everyone in that ecosystem to do all the steps of that process. You focus on what you do best. And in our case, engineering. So I don't need assistance from the engineering part of the ecosystem. I only need assistance from the chemistry section and then from the scaled manufacturing session. So who are the partners I go to once I have this made? Who do I go to scale it, to duplicate it? Those are where ecosystems come in, because you're introduced to the future partners that you never would have met on your own. Mm-hmm. And for the ecosystem, say, service providers, for them, it's a steady stream of clients. It's a steady business, and it gives them this exposure that they need to grow their businesses. So it serves both sides. But the challenge is, who makes the ecosystem?
Right.
Who's being paid for it? No. Well, not many people wake up one day and said, I want to just build an ecosystem. What's in it for you? You know how much work it would take to do that? So for us, it was a matter of, we kind of have to build our own. And that's what we ended up doing. We built, it's the beginning of the ecosystem. Let's say that. And we're testing it out and building the relationships. But we're at the stage now where we're attracting people to the relationship pool. And for us, we're focused in St. Paul. That's where a lot of the activity is. And the reason that we're moving there is because the ecosystem already existed there. We're not inventing the wheel. We're just inventing the application. And so the ecosystem really, it's a support structure. It's a network of relationships that you can become a part of and take it and get the benefit of. the takeaway is that I really want people to focus on the relationships, focus on expanding who you know and how you know them. If all your friends are coming from one group, expand that group, because in order for us to really capitalize on all the contributors who are out there, we need to increase our relationships. We need to bring these contributors into the process. And that first starts with outreach. So the question I have is like, how do we make a concerted effort to outreach? Because the challenge that I've seen, and I'm a newbie at this. I mean, I'm just coming into the FLC space as an outside observer. But what I'm seeing with a lot of different federal agencies, it's so siloed that relationships are broken. You can have 4 people in one agency that I've never met, and they all have complementary skills, but they'll never combine. And it's because of a lack of relationship. So for me, the solution to the problem starts with relationship, because every solution that we've been able to access has because I was introduced to somebody. There wasn't a single robot that fixed a single thing for me. It was always a human. And it was always, hey, here's this member of our ecosystem. They may be able to help you with X, Y, or Z. And then that introduction turned into a relationship. It turned into a series of conversations, a series of back and forward. And then that turns into a solution. So for me, the ecosystem's about forming the relationships that create the solutions. And without the ecosystem, you're not going to get the contributors to the table. You know, I'm a little bit crazy, so I made the dive. But there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me who can analyze risk a lot better than me that won't, because the risk is huge. And it's right now, I'm not so sure, because I'm still learning. I'm not sure how the tech transfers view the entrepreneurs. I don't know how they access them. I don't know how they make their quota in moving licenses, because very few companies know about this. So if I had to get like a wish list, I would wish that the FLC would put whatever resources into outreach, because what you guys have here is gold. It's like literally gold for the US economy. But I would say most, I don't know what the number is and how many US based companies know about tech transfer, but I would say it's below 1%. I'm just going to take a swing, because I've never met anyone through all the talks I've done, all the conversations. I have yet to meet another entrepreneur who already knew about it, who was like, oh, yes, I'm licensing from so-and-so, from NIH, from the CDC. No, right. But imagine how much can be done in the U.S. economy if that were the case. And not just the big companies, because big companies are more risk adverse. They have a lot more at stake. They have a lot more stakeholders. They're a slow moving beast. But what about all the excited small entrepreneurs who have the bandwidth, but they don't have the relationships? They don't have the awareness. So for me, a solution for the US economy is there. It's literally in the tech transfer offices right now. And the companies, the small businesses who have the capabilities, not self-contained. Because guess what? None of these companies are just going to come to you and be able to do this on their own. They all have their own core. And I think the relationships are what tie that core to the technology and enables that process. So I think awareness is the number one thing that will increase the speed of this process.
And it's so funny because I hear the same wish on both sides. I think it's there. I mean, and I'm not an expert. I'm not a federal employee, but from the conversations I have, I hear kind of the same thing, but from the other side. So that it's like both sides want to meet each other and they want the other one to know that they're there. So
basically we need a dating app for the FLC.
I think that's it.
But the FLC is making a dating app, and it's called the FLC Business. But it's amazing because it literally takes all of those resources that are impossible to find on your own, and it puts them into one place. Mm-hmm. And it's a start. It's definitely a huge, huge start. But then how do we get people to go there and look at it, and to look at it with the right perspective, to say, wow, these are technologies that you can take and that you can pair with this friends and family round of investment. And that will allow you to make the risky decision and go forward with it. And even if we get a success rate of 20%, what happens if we don't? How many technologies won't make it to the market if we don't create awareness? I think that should be the question. What happens if we don't do this?
Right.
And I think the number would be staggering. And I'll just give you one example. We'll just use investment into the minority community. if the minority community had the same capital resources that their counterparts did, there's $73 trillion of revenue that's missed because of that lack of connection. That's $1 trillion worth of opportunity off of saved lives from technologies, medications, life-saving technologies that are waiting. Mm-hmm. So the question that we have as U.S. citizens is, what happens if we don't do this? Well, status quo. And it's not that great. Healthcare is not that great in the U.S. Capital investment is not that great. It's not that diverse. So the question is not what's the benefit of doing it. It's what's the detriment of not doing it.
When you were looking through that NASA portfolio, and I'm sure your head was spinning, and if you think about other entrepreneurs and you multiply that by how many federal agencies and hundreds of labs, that's a lot of technologies. And sometimes it takes, they transform from what you see to what it turns into. So there has to be a process of,
well, there is.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that's being set up, not just by the group we work with, but by several groups. Like FedTech's a great example. So it's overwhelming to be introduced to this on your own. So it helps to be sent through with a group that are all going through the same thing. And there are several pilot programs going on right now that do just that. They take entrepreneurs, a lot of them are minority owned small businesses. They introduce them to the tech transfer process and they send them through a boot camp. Some are 16 weeks, some are 3 years. But the purpose is to introduce these companies to this technology, help them analyze the technologies. Because if you're not a systems engineer, you won't know half of the things you're looking for. So we work with the companies to recognize the opportunities. But this is the key. We start with the buyers. So we work with larger companies to say, here's some technologies in the tech transfer space that are probably of interest to you. Which ones would you like to see done? And then once they identify those 4 or 5 technologies that they're interested in being a buyer, then we make the connection with the entrepreneur who can develop the technology. So the buyer gets an acquisition target. They get reduced cost of research and development because it's off the books. They're doing it through another entrepreneur. So it gives them the ability to invest wisely, to get access to the technology from the tech transfer space without making a huge risky investment on their side. That's the pull method. So instead of saying, we're going to bring you 1,000 things that you may have no care about, we're going to ask you first, what do you care about? And then we'll find the solutions provider for that. So when it's brought back to you, you're already in line. You already are interested. And that enables us to de-risk the process, even for the entrepreneur. Because now you're being introduced to a technology that, I can't even say any company names, but let's say the largest medical device manufacturer in the world is one of our partners. And they scanned NIH and NASA technologies and chose which ones they wanted. And then we found the group of entrepreneurs to develop it. And out of this first pilot, which again, I'm being cautious about how much I say because it's still in progress. Out of that first pilot, there were 5 technologies that were introduced by this large company. 4 of them were licensed in that first trial.
Wow.
That's 4 minority businesses who are now currently in this day developing technologies for some of the largest medical device companies in the world as a strategic partnership. So you start with a hugely valuable intellectual property, you find a buyer for it, and then you feed it through the ecosystem. So now everyone's risks are reduced. It makes it easier for the entrepreneur because now I say, yeah, I'll jump off the cliff if I know that I have a parachute and there's a target right down range that I can land on. And there's a big contract or a big deal at the end of this process that de-risks the decision for the entrepreneur. It de-risks the decision for the tech transfer office because now they're giving the technology into the hands of people who will actually take it to market and they have a buyer. So to me, it's about de-risking all the way around. It's relationships promote de-risking. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. Well, I think it's an excellent story and I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to thank Chris also for shouting out FLC Business. We usually call it more of a tool than a dating app, but either way, FLC Business is a searchable database of federal technologies, facilities, and expertise. where you can make connections to bring your vision to life. Go to federallabs.org/FLC-business to learn more and hit the orange button on that page to dive in and start searching for your next partner. If you want to hear more conversations like this one about entrepreneurial ecosystems, go back and listen to our episodes with Robert Hurd, Paul Campbell, Brian Darmody, Kathleen Otto Rosenblum, Stephen Avil, and more. There are so many great ones. If there were a Transfer Files bingo card, you definitely want ecosystem on there. Thank you, of course, to our listeners for tuning in for this conversation and spreading the word about this podcast. Tell your friends and colleagues about the Transfer Files and leave us a review and rating because that helps other people find us. Subscribe and listen to more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Check the show notes on the episode page at federallabs.org for links to more resources and information that came up in our conversation. And thanks, as always, to our producer and digital marketing manager, Carly Dunow, graphics manager, Danny Batchelor, web content and systems manager, Jess Klein, and the FLC staff and community for your support. We'll see you back in 2 weeks for Transfer Files Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.